My friends, listen closely. There comes a moment in every believer's life when the heavens grow silent, the prayers seem unanswered, and every door you knock on stays shut. You begin to wonder, God, where are you? Have you forgotten me? But tonight, I want to tell you, you were not abandoned, you were being examined. You were in the final test of God's refining fire. And glory to His name. You passed. You see, the chosen ones of God are not defined by comfort, but by their capacity to endure the crushing. Before every crown, there is a cross. Before every victory, there is a valley. Before every divine promotion, there is a painful process. Some of you walked through storms that should have destroyed you. You faced betrayal that broke your heart, nights so dark you almost lost your mind. But through it all, you held on to the hand of God when you couldn't see His face. That, my friends, was your final test. When heaven grew silent, God was watching. When you didn't feel His presence, He was testing your persistence. You didn't realize that while you were weeping, angels were writing. Heaven was recording your faith, your endurance, your tears. Every sleepless night, every whispered prayer, every "I still believe," when nothing made sense, it all became the evidence that you were chosen. The chosen ones are not those who never fall. They are those who keep getting up. They are not those who never doubt. They are those who believe again, even after doubt. You didn't pass the test because you were flawless. You passed because you were faithful. You didn't have strength, but you had surrender. You didn't have clarity, but you had courage. Do remember the moment you almost gave up. The time when you said, God, I can't do this anymore. And somehow, something inside whispered, just one more day. Hold on. That was not your voice. That was the Spirit of God sustaining you through your test. And tonight, He declares you made it. You passed what others failed. You remained standing where others fell. You see, the greatest test is not the one that measures your knowledge, but your trust. When you could no longer see the promise, you kept walking by faith. When everyone else left, you said, though He slay me, yet will I trust Him. That kind of faith moves heaven. That kind of endurance earns a new anointing. God's final test is never about the blessing. It's about the believer. He was not testing what you could handle. He was testing who you would worship when the blessings disappeared. And now, because you remained faithful, He's about to release what you were being prepared for. The breaking was not to destroy you. It was to define you. My friend, you didn't just survive the storm. You were strengthened by it. You didn't just pass the test. You were transformed through it. You are not the same person who entered that trial. The pain that once broke you has now built you. The tears that once blinded you have now anointed your eyes to see deeper. So lift your head high. You are not forgotten. You are favored. You are not abandoned. You are anointed. You are not a failure. You are chosen. Heaven has stamped your name with victory. And your next season will testify that every test was worth it. Because when God tests His chosen, it's never to fail them, it's to reveal them. And tonight, the revelation is this: you have passed God's final test. Every chosen one faces a season of breaking before their breakthrough. There is no crown without a cross, no glory without a battle, and no destiny without a desert. God never promotes without first proving, never elevates without first refining, and never releases purpose without first testing the heart. The pain you have endured was not punishment, it was preparation. The nights you cried yourself to sleep, the days you felt forgotten, the seasons where everything around you seemed to fall apart, were not random. They were the fire that formed your faith. God was shaping you for what He had already spoken over you. Sometimes He has to break your plans to bless His purpose. Sometimes He allows the storm not to destroy you, but to strip away what you were depending on more than Him. You see, before every blessing, there is always a breaking. Joseph had to be thrown into the pit before he entered the palace. David had to face Goliath before he sat on the throne. Even Jesus had to endure the wilderness before he began his ministry. And if you are chosen, you will not escape the process. God's hand may feel heavy, but it is holy. What you thought was rejection was actually redirection. What you thought was loss was actually positioning. The breaking was never meant to end you. It was meant to expose the strength that only suffering could reveal. Because before God can trust you with influence, He must first test you with isolation. Before He can give you power, He must teach you humility. Before He can fill your hands, He must empty your heart of everything that competes with Him. So don't despise your breaking. It is the soil where greatness grows. The crushing of the olive is what releases the oil. The pressing of the grape is what produces the wine. The shaking of your life was never random. It was the sign that something divine was being birthed within you. Every tear watered the seed of purpose. Every delay was a divine pause, not a denial. God was not punishing you. He was preparing you for the next level. He knew that without the breaking, you wouldn't be able to carry the blessing. The very pain that made you question Him will one day make you thank Him, because it was in the breaking that your faith became real. The chosen are refined in the fire. They learn that comfort never creates character. They learn that faith that is never tested can never be trusted. You may have lost friends, lost opportunities, even lost yourself for a time, but through it all, something stronger was being forged. Your worship became deeper. Your prayers became purer. Your dependence on God became unshakable. The breaking stripped away your pride, your fear, your need for control, until only one thing remained: your absolute trust in Him. And that, my friend, was the point of it all. You didn't know it then, but while you were crying, heaven was cheering. Every time you refused to give up, every time you whispered, "I still believe," even when everything inside you said, "Walk away," you were passing the test. The furnace that was meant to consume you was actually refining you into pure gold. God was proving your faith, preparing your heart, and positioning your life for what comes next. Because the battle before the blessing is always the proof of the chosen. You are not where you are by accident. You are standing where you stand because you endured what others could not. You faced the breaking, and you did not quit. That breaking was the doorway to your breakthrough. And now, after the crushing, after the tears, after the long nights of silence, God is ready to reveal the reason behind the pain. You have survived the breaking, and because of that, you are ready for the blessing that's about to come. When you prayed and heard nothing, when heaven felt like it had closed its doors, when you whispered to God and all you received was silence, that was not rejection, it was observation. God was not ignoring you, He was watching you. In those quiet, painful nights when your faith trembled and your heart broke, heaven was measuring the depth of your trust. The silence of God is never the absence of God. Sometimes He hides not to hurt you, but to see if you will still seek Him when you can't trace Him. He withdraws His felt presence to reveal the strength of your unseen faith. Because faith that depends only on feelings is fragile, but faith that stands in silence is unshakable. There are moments when God removes every visible sign of His presence, not because He has left, but because He wants to grow you beyond emotions into endurance. He wants to see if you will still sing when the music stops, if you will still worship when the blessings disappear, if you will still trust His promise when His presence feels far. You see, the silence was never empty. It was sacred. It was heaven's classroom, where your soul was learning how to believe without evidence, how to love without reward, and how to hope without guarantee. God was refining your faith, stretching it beyond the shallow waters of comfort into the deep ocean of conviction. Every chosen one must walk through a season where heaven seems still. It is in that silence that your spiritual muscles are strengthened. It's easy to praise when prayers are answered, but the real test is whether you'll praise when they aren't. When every sign says, God has forgotten you, yet you lift your hands and say, I still trust you. That's when your worship becomes powerful. That's when your faith graduates from emotional to eternal. In the heavens, silence separates the believers who seek His hand from those who seek His heart. Think about it. Abraham waited decades for a promise that looked impossible. Joseph spent years in a prison cell where no word came from heaven. Even Jesus, hanging on the cross, cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? Yet in that silence, God was still working. Behind the stillness was a strategy. Behind the silence was a plan. God was proving that He doesn't need to speak to still be sovereign. He doesn't need to move visibly to be moving powerfully. His silence is often His greatest statement because it forces you to trust His character when you can't understand His conduct. The silence of God teaches you to listen differently. It tunes your heart to hear whispers instead of shouts, to sense direction in stillness, to find comfort in unseen presence. When God doesn't speak, He's speaking through silence, saying, do you trust me even now? And when you answer yes, even with tears in your eyes, that's when heaven records your faith as victory. Because the chosen are not proven in noise. They are proven in quietness. Some of you thought God had turned His back, but He was standing closer than ever. He wasn't ignoring your cry. He was guarding your destiny. He knew that if He answered too soon, you would settle for less. So He stayed silent, not to torment you, but to train you. He was teaching you to walk by faith and not by sight. The silence was His way of saying, you're ready for deeper trust. It's easy to believe when the miracle happens, but heaven looks for those who can believe before it does. So, if you've been through that season where prayers bounced off the walls and your spirit grew weary, understand this. God's silence was a test of sight. Would you still believe He was good when nothing good seemed to happen? Would you still cling to His promise when everything around you contradicted it? If you are still standing, if you are still believing, then you passed that test. Heaven's silence was not punishment, it was promotion. God saw your faithfulness in the dark. And now He is preparing to reward you in the light. Because every moment you stayed faithful in the silence, every tear you shed in prayer, every time you whispered, I still believe, was building a testimony. And when the silence finally breaks, the sound that follows will be the voice of victory declaring, you made it through the silence, and God never left your side. You are chosen not because you are perfect, but because you refuse to quit. The chosen are not the strongest. They are the ones who kept walking when their legs trembled, who kept believing when doubt screamed in their ears, who kept worshiping when they couldn't feel a thing. God never looked for the flawless. He looked for the faithful. He searched for hearts that would stay loyal even when life was unfair, spirits that would still praise when the storms wouldn't stop. You see, the mark of the chosen is not perfection. It is perseverance. It's not that they never fell. It's that every time they did, they got back up again. They were hit, but not defeated. Broken, but not destroyed. The chosen ones are different. They walk through fire that others can't survive. They carry wounds that tell stories of endurance. They cry, they bleed, they struggle, but they never surrender. When life knocks them down, they rise again, not because they have strength, but because grace lifts them. It's the power of divine favor that makes them unstoppable. They are the ones who keep showing up to the fight, even after losing the last round. They may limp, but they don't leave. They may be wary, but they won't walk away, because deep down, they know they were created for more. Something inside them whispers, don't stop now, God's not finished yet. If you look closely, you'll realize that most of the heroes of faith were never perfect people. Moses doubted his calling. David made grave mistakes. Elijah wanted to die, and Peter denied the very Lord he loved. Yet God still used them. Why? Because they didn't stay down. They repented. They returned, and they ran back into God's arms. That's the mark of the chosen, the willingness to begin again when the world says it's over. You see, God doesn't choose the qualified. He qualifies the chosen. He doesn't need your perfection. He needs your persistence. He doesn't need your brilliance. He needs your belief. Every scar on your soul tells heaven's story of survival. Every tear you've shed is a trophy of your tenacity. The enemy tried to break you, but you bent and didn't snap. You walked through valleys that could have buried you, but you came out still believing. You held on to promises that seemed impossible. And even when you lost everything, you refused to lose your faith. That's what separates the chosen from the crowd. The crowd praises when everything is easy. The chosen praise when everything is painful. The crowd follows when it's convenient. The chosen follow when it costs them everything. The chosen ones are not immune to fear, but they move forward despite it. They are not untouched by sorrow, but they find strength in surrender. What makes them chosen is their unrelenting trust in God's character. Even when His plan doesn't make sense, they learn to say, I don't understand it, but I'll still stand. They stop asking, why me? And start saying, use me. Their trials become testimonies, their pain becomes purpose, and their endurance becomes evidence that God's hand is upon them. There is a certain glow in the eyes of the chosen. It's not pride, it's peace. It's the quiet confidence of someone who's been through too much to doubt God now. They've seen too many miracles to stop believing. They've walked through too many storms to question His strength. They know that the same God who carried them before will carry them again. And though they may bear the marks of their battles, those marks are proof of victory. You too carry that mark. Every time you chose faith over fear, every time you forgave when it hurt, every time you kept going when quitting seemed easier, you were showing heaven that you are one of the chosen. You didn't have to be perfect to be chosen. You just had to stay. God looked at your persistence and said, that's the one I can trust. Because what God builds on, He first tests in perseverance. The storms didn't disqualify you, they identified you. The pain didn't remove your purpose, it revealed it. So hold your head high. You're not defined by your failures, you're defined by your faith. You're not chosen because you're without flaw, but because you have a heart that won't let go of God. And when the dust settles, when the trial ends, when heaven looks back at the record of your life, it will show one undeniable truth. You were chosen, not because you were perfect, but because you never gave up. The greatest test of all is to believe God when there is no visible reason to trust Him when everything in your life says it's over, to stand on a promise that no one else heard but you. That kind of faith is not comfortable, it's costly. It's the kind of faith that feels like walking through fog, taking steps when you can't even see the ground beneath you. There comes a point when God removes all the visible evidence of His work just to see if you'll still believe His word. When every door closes, when every prayer seems unanswered, when every sign disappears, that's when faith must rise above sight. That's when trust must carry you farther than proof ever could. There are moments when God will allow you to stand in the middle of uncertainty with nothing to lean on but His promise. He'll take away the support systems, the reassurance, the signs, until all that remains is the memory of what He said. It's not because He's cruel. It's because He's cultivating a deeper kind of belief. He's teaching you to walk by faith, not by confirmation. Faith without evidence is the birthplace of true trust. When God said to Abraham, "Leave your country and go to a land I will show you," He didn't give him a map or a guarantee. Abraham walked simply because God spoke. That's what God desires from you. Not blind faith, but believing faith. Faith that says, even if I don't see it, I know He's working. This is the test that separates those who love God for His blessings from those who love Him for who He is. It's one thing to believe when the miracle happens, but it's another to believe before it does. It's easy to trust when everything makes sense, but true faith is trusting when nothing does. Sometimes God will let everything around you fall apart to see if your heart will still hold together in Him. The chosen ones are often taken through seasons of contradiction, where the promise and the reality look completely different. You believe you're chosen, yet you face rejection. You believe you're blessed, yet you experience loss. You believe God is faithful, yet life feels unfair. But even in that tension, your faith is being refined. Every delay, every disappointment, every unanswered prayer is a divine opportunity to prove what you believe. The question is not whether God can do it. The question is, will you still believe if He doesn't? The highest level of faith is not just believing for a miracle. It's believing in God's goodness, even if the miracle never comes. It's saying, even if the fig tree does not blossom, even if the vine bears no fruit, yet will I rejoice in the Lord. That kind of faith shakes heaven. It moves mountains that cannot be seen. It tells God, you don't have to perform for me to trust you. That is faith without evidence. Faith that pleases God most. Sometimes faith looks foolish. Noah looked foolish building an ark when there wasn't a cloud in the sky. Sarah looked foolish believing she could bear a child at 90. Moses looked foolish standing before the Red Sea with nothing but a staff. Yet every act of foolish faith became the foundation of miraculous deliverance. So when God asks you to trust Him in silence, don't be afraid of how it looks. Faith without evidence may look irrational to others, but it's irresistible to God. Heaven is drawn to that kind of courage. Angels take note of that kind of obedience. There will be days when your faith feels small, when doubts whisper louder than truth. But remember, God never asked for perfection in your faith, only persistence. He said that faith as small as a mustard seed could move mountains. That means even when your belief feels fragile, it's still powerful enough for God to work through. You just have to hold on. When you can't see the way, hold on. When you can't hear His voice, hold on. Because faith that endures the dark is faith that will see the dawn. So if you're standing in a place where nothing makes sense, don't assume you've been abandoned. You might just be in the middle of God's final test, the test of faith without evidence. Keep walking even if you can't see. Keep praying even if you don't feel. Keep believing even when it looks impossible. Because heaven is watching, and the moment you refuse to give up, you pass the test. And when that test is over, when the breakthrough finally comes, you'll look back and realize that every moment of uncertainty was shaping unshakable faith inside you. You'll see that God was never absent. He was proving that your belief could stand even when your eyes could not. Now that you've passed the test, the reward is not just blessing, it's transformation. God didn't simply change your circumstances, He changed you. The struggle wasn't about what you lost or gained on the outside. It was about what was being rebuilt on the inside. The fire you walked through burned away more than pain. It burned away fear, pride, and dependence on everything that could not sustain you. You came out of the test different. You pray differently now. You love more deeply. You forgive more easily. You see life with clearer eyes because the storm taught you what really matters. You discovered that victory is not just about receiving something from God. It's about becoming someone in God. When you were in the trial, you begged for it to end, but now you understand that it was shaping you for something far greater. The waiting grew your wisdom, the breaking built your character, and the silence strengthened your faith. Before the test, you had faith that was fragile, dependent on comfort and control. After the test, you carry faith that can't be shaken. because it's rooted in knowing that even when everything falls apart, God remains. You learned that peace isn't found in perfect conditions, but in perfect trust. You learned that joy isn't the absence of struggle, but the presence of strength. That's the reward of the refined. You didn't just survive, you evolved. God often uses pain as His most powerful tool. He allows pressure not to crush you, but to create something inside you that can carry the weight of His glory. Diamonds are formed in deep darkness and extreme heat. Gold is purified in fire, and you, chosen one, were shaped the same way. Every hardship, every tear, every moment you thought you were breaking was actually the moment heaven was building you. The process refined you until your heart was ready to hold the promise. What once would have destroyed you now drives you closer to Him. You've learned how to walk with grace through grief, how to praise with power through pain, how to stand in storms without losing your song. You see, God's goal was never just to bless you with things. It was to build you into someone who could steward His presence. A lesser version of you couldn't handle the next level, so He had to strengthen your foundation. The reward isn't only what you'll receive, it's who you've become. You've learned how to trust in uncertainty, how to see light in darkness, how to find hope in despair. You've become dangerous to the enemy because you've been through fire and still chosen faith. You've discovered that the real victory isn't getting out of the storm. It's realizing that even in the storm, God is with you. Now, as you step into this new season, you carry something divine. You carry authority born from adversity. You carry peace that pain could not steal. You carry joy that no circumstance can shake. You carry endurance that was built in battle. You carry the fragrance of faith that has been proven genuine. The same people who saw you broken will soon see you blessed. But this time, your blessing won't just be material, it will be spiritual. You'll walk with humility, with compassion, with wisdom that only those who have wrestled with God can understand. And when you speak now, there's a weight to your words because they come from wounds that have been healed. You can tell someone, hold on, not because it's cliché, but because you know what it feels like to hang on by a thread and see God pull you through. You can say, God is faithful, not as a phrase, but as a testimony. You can tell someone, this pain has purpose, because you've seen purpose rise from ashes. That's the power of those who pass the test. They don't just talk about God, they reflect Him. So, lift your head. You've come through the refining fire, and now you shine differently. You don't carry the same fears you once did, because you've seen too much of God's goodness to doubt Him now. You've been through hell and found heaven's hand guiding you out. You've been through loss and found love that doesn't leave. You've been through breaking and found beauty in the pieces. The test changed you, and that's the greatest reward of all. Because what God has refined, He will now reveal. What He has tested, He will now trust. You have passed God's final test, not just by surviving it, but by becoming the kind of person heaven can now use for greater things. The blessing is not ahead of you, it's within you.